The cold did not ask for permission as it wrapped itself around her ankles and climbed upward, sharp and impatient, while the cafe windows glowed with warmth she could not reach. Snow drifted sideways along the sidewalk in Chicago, melting into gray slush near the curb, and she stood there pretending she wasn't shaking, pretending the thin wool coat she wore was enough. It was the kind of cold that made people look away, the kind that reminded you of times you waited too long for help and learned to stop expecting it. What would you do if you were standing there, watching others sip coffee behind glass while your fingers went numb, knowing pride was the only thing keeping you from stepping inside? Her name was Rachel, and the past year had taught her how fast a life could unravel. One moment she had a small apartment in Indiana, a job at a dental office, and a fiancé who promised stability, and the next she had boxes stacked in her sister's garage and a silence where phone calls used to be. The breakup had been quiet and practical, almost polite, but it hollowed her out. When the dental office closed during layoffs, Chicago became a last attempt, not a dream. She came because she believed cities held second chances the way churches held prayers, and she clung to that belief even now as snow found its way into her shoes. Inside the cafe, people laughed and leaned forward over tables, unaware that someone outside was questioning every decision that led her here. She had been waiting for a potential employer to respond to an email she sent from the public library that morning, her phone battery draining faster in the cold. The interview was supposed to be informal, just coffee, but the message never came. As the minutes stretched, doubt pressed down harder than the winter air. If you were her, would you stay in hope, or would you walk away and accept another quiet loss? She told herself she could last a few more minutes. She always told herself that. He noticed her by accident. Michael had stepped out of the cafe to take a call, irritation buzzing through him because his promotion meant longer hours and fewer chances to breathe. The city felt louder lately, and success felt heavier than he expected. When he turned toward the street, he saw her standing still, hands clenched, eyes unfocused, the kind of stillness that came from exhaustion rather than patience. There was something familiar in the way she held herself, like someone who had learned to brace for disappointment. He ended the call without thinking much about it, the words trailing off as his attention shifted to the way her shoulders trembled against the cold. Michael had grown up in Ohio, raised by a mother who believed faith was shown through action, not words. After his father died, they survived on casseroles left by church members and rides offered without explanation. He remembered what it felt like to be cold in ways that had nothing to do with weather, and the memory rose now, uninvited but insistent. He didn't analyze it or weigh consequences. He simply reached for the buttons of his coat and shrugged it off, the wool still warm from his body, and stepped closer. Rachel looked up, startled, confusion flickering across her face as the coat was placed gently around her shoulders. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, that stress had finally blurred her senses. Then the warmth settled in, real and immediate, and her throat tightened with something dangerously close to tears. She hadn't realized how badly she needed warmth until it was given. Michael didn't wait for thanks or explanation. He just nodded once, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and walked back inside, leaving her standing there wrapped in a stranger's kindness. She stood frozen for a different reason now, the weight of the coat reminding her that she was still seen. The interview never happened, but the moment did. She eventually stepped into the cafe, returned the coat to the barista who promised to give it back to its owner, and sat alone with a cup of coffee she could barely afford, hands shaking as much from emotion as from cold. That night, she wrote in her journal that something small had shifted, something she didn't have a name for yet. Weeks passed, and life continued its uneven rhythm. Rachel found temporary work at a community center on the south side, helping organize food drives and tutoring children after school. The pay was modest, but the purpose steadied her. Michael, meanwhile, returned to his routines, though something about that afternoon stayed with him. He found himself paying closer attention to people on sidewalks, noticing faces instead of avoiding them. He volunteered more often, though he never connected it to that snowy day. Their paths crossed again by chance months later at a volunteer event downtown. Recognition came slowly, like a memory surfacing through fog, and when it did, it carried a quiet gravity. They didn't speak much that day, working side by side, sorting donations, sharing the unspoken understanding that some moments didn't need explanation. Over time, they talked more, about faith, loss, and the strange ways life rerouted people. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just a steady unfolding of trust. Rachel healed in pieces. Some nights were still heavy with doubt, but she no longer felt invisible. Michael learned that success didn't have to mean distance, that slowing down could be an act of courage. They challenged each other gently, reminding one another that grace often arrived unannounced, wearing the simplest forms. Years later, Rachel would walk past that same cafe, now on her way to a job she loved, the city no longer feeling like an enemy. She would remember the cold and the coat and how one small act changed the direction of her heart. Michael would sometimes think about how close he came to staying inside that day, how easy it would have been to ignore the quiet suffering outside the glass. Before the story ends, take a moment and ask yourself, if you were standing there that day, cold and unseen, or warm and busy inside, what choice would you make? If this story touched something deep within you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if it truly moved your heart, gently consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, so more stories like this can find those who need them most.